This is Event Masters. Behind the scenes stories, experiences, and lessons shared by the world's leading event experts. Hosted by Christian Napier.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Event Masters, behind the scenes look at how these major international high-profile events are organized, talking with the career professionals who actually pulled these things off. And today, I am super excited to have Lisa Friedman joining us. And Lisa, you have so much experience. We'll get into that in a minute. But before we get into that, welcome to our podcast today. Thank you for coming. And where are you joining us from?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here and be able to speak with you and get caught up. You are catching me in my office in San Diego, California.
Oh my gosh, San Diego, one of my favorite cities in the world. Up here, it is snowing. I'm looking out my window, and we've got big snowflakes that are coming down. I would very much like a visit to San Diego at this time of year. Not going to lie.
Although I will tell you, well, first of all, yay for the snow, because I know it's been a little thin on the mountains there in Utah. I'm jealous because I miss being there. But yeah, it's been chilly here, relatively speaking. Certainly not compared to like Kansas City this past weekend or Buffalo. But, for us, it's sweater season. So, yeah, but I have no complaints. I do live in a pretty beautiful place, and come anytime, Christian.
It is a beautiful place, and I definitely need to put that on my calendar and come down and see you. Well, you said we had a difficult December when it comes to snow. This month has been fantastic for snow. So I think in the last 7 days, Alta Ski Resort got more than 2 meters of snow.
Wow.
We've had a lot of snow in the last 7 to 10 days, so I can't complain. It's catching up, but you're right. December was pretty dry. Well, for those of you who don't know Lisa, who are going to be watching or listening to this podcast, let's get into Lisa's history a little bit. Just a few highlights from her background. So first of all, been involved in events for more than 30 years. You also do a lot of work with nonprofits. We'll talk about that. You've done for-profit. You've done work all around the world. Listen to these skills. You said this bio, and I just like, holy cow. Integrated business operations, solutions architecture, facility design, construction and operations, business development and strategic planning, financial forecasting, budget management, resource allocation, staff, volunteer, contractor leadership, as well as marketing, branding, and sales. Pretty much all of it. Like that is a big umbrella of skills and experience, Lisa. It's super impressive. You joined Salt Lake 2002. We connected there. You were on our podcast looking back at the Salt Lake 2002 Olympic Winter and Paralympic Winter Games. But you decided to abandon us here in Salt Lake, and you moved to San Diego, the warmer climes of San Diego, where you've been ever since. And before the pandemic, you were working primarily on these events. And then after the pandemic, you had a bit of a pivot. And I'd like to ask about that when we get into the podcast a little bit too, because some people spend their entire lives in this career, in this event space, but sometimes people pivot and do other things. So I'm really interested in doing that and learning about that. Not only do you have all of these skills, but you're also a certified Pilates instructor because you really believe in active and healthy lifestyles. We were talking about active and healthy lifestyles before we went on air. You're a dog mom to Riley, a proud aunt to your niece Tivoli, which is attending Colorado, University of Colorado there in Boulder. So the Buffaloes.
Yes.
And
prime time. And now we've got Ocho Cinco and Warren Sapp. They're coaching.
Yeah, it's things are turning around there when it comes to football. Super exciting. And now the school, along with the University of Utah and the Arizona schools, are moving from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. So all kinds of fun things going on there.
It's going to be the Big 20 or the Big 30 or something.
Yeah, who knows? And then what's going to happen in a few years from now? Maybe we'll just have one big conglomerate or two big conferences, the Big Ten, SEC. Yeah, I'm going down a rabbit hole there. I don't want to go down. Okay, so
good predictions for the future.
Yeah,
got to put some money on it.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention your nephew Benton in 7th grade. So very cool. Okay. You are the first person who actually included some other interesting tidbits. And I want to ask you about these things. Okay. So first of all, you included 2 favorite quotes. So the
Yeah.
first one was, the only person you should try to be better than is the person you were yesterday. What a really powerful quote. And the second one was, wanted encouragers, because we have a surplus of critics. So why don't you tell me a little bit about these quotes and why they resonate with you so much?
Now that I have gotten a little older and been in and out of the event environment, and thank you for talking about, yes, all of the skills. And I will say that 95% of all of those skills really were built working the various events in different capacities. So I owe where I am today to everything that I've learned and the people that I've worked for and with over the years. So I'm very fortunate in that. But yeah, the first quote on being better, working to be a better person every day is just, I'm at that point in my life where, how can I pay it forward, treating people with as much respect as possible, and also trying not to be quite so hard on myself. I mean, I am still very much a perfectionist, but we got to be a little kinder to ourselves. I think that's something probably the pandemic, I think, really kind of drove home for me. The more time we sort of spent alone or in our bubbles, tried to not be quite so self-critical. So, and then the other one, I mean, that's an easy one, especially given, kind of the state of the world in the last, I don't even know how many years you really want to go back. But just, there are more than enough critics, and it's easy to be one. It's very easy to look at the negative. But again, as I've gotten older, and especially working with younger people, whether it's in events and as you said, we will get to what my full-time job is now, but really just working with younger people to look for the positive and to be more encouraging. And I also think that younger people are teaching us to also be less critical. I feel like that, mentioned my niece and nephew, they seem to be much more open-minded, and maybe that's youth, or maybe it's just, bullying is unacceptable for these kids and their peers, which is a beautiful thing to see, because there's a lot of bullying that's going on in the world, and hopefully this sort of generation that's coming up is going to remedy that for a lot of us and change our attitude. So that quote really struck me.
I really love those quotes too, and I appreciate your optimistic outlook on the rising generation. I feel the same way, understanding that we're living in very, very challenging and interesting times. But I appreciate this really positive, optimistic approach. I could go down in that for an hour, but I'm not going to go there anymore. But I have to ask you about these. You have a favorite vacation spot. We actually have 2. There's a tie.
Yes.
So one is in Costa Rica and the other is in Lake Tahoe. Now these are very different places, right? One there on the coast, the other one up in there in the Sierra Nevadas. So why don't you tell us about why these 2 spots are your favorite spots to visit?
So Costa Rica, I went there on a surf-fari back in 2016 with a group of women from here in San Diego. And it was just amazing. Playa Nosara is incredible, or Playa Guiones in Nosara is incredible. I mean, there's no real street lights. The roads at the time were not paved. We just went to surf and eat and explore, and we did yoga and Pilates, and it was one of the most perfect vacations. I got so much more out of it than I went into expecting, which I don't think always happens. And I mean, I've had a lot of really great trips, but that just really struck me. And it's just a beautiful place. And the Ticans, the Costa Rican people, are incredibly warm and inviting. And it was just, it's an amazing place. I encourage anyone to go there. That's the only place in Costa Rica I've ever been, because it's the place I want to go to. I mean, you have to, I haven't been to the southern part because this is in the Northwest state. So, and then Lake Tahoe, we grew up going there as kids, and we still go up as a family. And it's just, again, I've actually never been in the winter. So I've never skied on Sierra Cement. I am very much a fan of the beautiful champagne powder of Utah. No offense to my friends in Colorado or my niece in Colorado, but I would much prefer to be in Utah on the snow. But Tahoe in the summers is one of the most beautiful. I mean, it's like Park City in the summer. honestly. But it's I'm just fortunate to have grown up going up there. So I can go there and let go and not think about things, or go up there and work and still feel relaxed.
Well, when it comes to Tahoe in the winter, sometimes it can be difficult, with the weather conditions. In fact, just this past weekend, my wife's brother and his family, they were returning from Hawaii, and they were driving back from San Francisco, and they got caught up in the storms there over Donner Pass, and they were closed, and it ended up taking them a really, really long time to get home. And so, they get a ton of snow, but sometimes it can be challenging to find your way up here.
50 and 80 coming from Sacramento and San Francisco, definitely. I was in 2019, I was in Roseville, California, outside of Sacramento, working for a party rentals company. We can talk about a little bit, but yeah, and that entire winter season, 50 and 80 kept getting shut down for weather. So yes, I feel family. That's
it's tough. It's tough. Okay, favorite local beach. Sunset Cliffs.
Yes. So I don't surf there, but it's just beautiful just to go sit and, watch the ocean and think about, there's something about being on the water or at the water and thinking about all of the life that we can't see kind of below the surface. And, and of course, off the coast of California, there's those incredibly deep canyons, and it's scary, but exciting. I mean, I don't necessarily want to run into some of the fish and or mammals, but it's there's just something about it. It's very calming.
Well, it's hard to beat a sunset there off the coast of California. Amazing sunsets there. Okay, two last things. One is the adult beverage, Benton Lane Pinot Noir. So why don't you tell us about your favorite adult beverage?
So yes, the Benton, my nephew is Benton. He was actually named for my father, but so the name has a little bit to do with it, but it's actually just a really lovely Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley in Oregon. And yes, I'm still a California wine drinker, but there's something really special about the reds that come from that area. And it's just really delicious. Pairs well with pretty much everything.
Perfect. And then your bands, again, you have a tie here. You don't have one. And these bands span generations, right? The Eagles, an amazing band, and Foo Fighters, a huge band, started up in the 90s and continues today.
Yes. Well, yeah. So I think I know I have a thing for drummers. So there was something about Don Henley and his ability. And honestly, Joe Walsh is the most amazing. I've had the opportunity to see him in concert he had like a little garage band back in the early 90s. And it was an amazing experience because he is so like into the music and so passionate, and he just loses all sense of place and time when he plays guitar. And Don Henley is very much that way as a drummer, just talented, and all the songs just resonate, and they're, so, and then with Foo Fighters, again, well, Nirvana could be in there too, but Dave Grohl is a drummer, and just, how incredibly talented all of the members of that band are, what they did with Sonic Highways, and I can't remember what year that was, maybe 2016, but where they went to various cities in like a week, people that they met and interviewed, and then they created songs. I mean, Dave and Taylor like wrote it all. And so I got to see them in concert in Lake Tahoe this past summer, and it was one of the best concerts I've ever seen.
Wow. Amazing. And R.I.P. Taylor Hawkins.
Yes.
Who is an amazing drummer for Foo Fighters, and it was so sad. I was shocking to hear of his passing, and I wish all the band members and fans the best, because it's hard to leave it's hard to hear that kind of news when such an important band member passes. But I really enjoyed Taylor's drumming. I would watch YouTube videos of Taylor, like he would have little master classes and things on drumming, because I too am like big into the drumming thing. So something else we have in common. We'll have another conversation about drummers offline. All right. Well, thank you for giving us a little flavor of what makes Lisa Friedman. But we need to get into this event part, right? So let's talk about that. How did you get involved in this crazy event business?
It was absolutely an accident. I started out my senior year of college. I went to UC Santa Barbara and didn't have a heavy load. Started working at a tennis club. Ended up helping run some tennis tournaments there, which took me to Palm Desert. But I had grown up in Atlanta, and the Olympics had been awarded there in '88, I believe, for the '96 games. My old eighth grade teacher maybe it was '90, but whatever. My old eighth grade teacher was working for the bid committee. So like my first Christmas home of college, because I had grown up in Atlanta, was working there, and I went in and stapled documents and spiral bound bid documents and that kind of thing. And then it ended up leading to a job in 1993 where I was fortunate to meet a lot of amazing people, including Jerry Anderson. And I rode Jerry's coattails really from then on, because he got hired in Salt Lake. I think it was late 95. So we got through the '96 games because he did continue his contract there. And then he came to Utah and brought me to Salt Lake in summer of '97. And, I would take my vacation from SLOC to go do Super Bowl with him, because he'd been doing Super Bowl since Super Bowl 19. And in Atlanta, met so many great people, Colin Hilton and, Doug Arnott and that whole group, who eventually, most everybody kind of seemed to migrate to Salt Lake, and we met you and so many other phenomenal people, and, created such a great event team there, and, continued to pick up people from kind of all over the world. And it's been an amazing ride. And it's, like I said, you've learned a lot. Had the fortune to have had such amazing, business type experiences. You brought up budgeting and budget management and strategic planning and forecasting, and, all of those things apply to any event that you do, whether it's a sports event or a concert or a trade show or a festival. So it's that whole sense of integrated operations, which is really where I feel like I have excelled, and my focus is. It's a big part of what I do when we get to what I do currently.
Well, I have to ask you about going back to university days. So you're there at Cal State Santa Barbara. What were you studying? I mean, was that topic aligned at all? Was your major aligned at all with the things that you're going to be doing in events? Or was it completely different?
I can make connections. So I double majored sociology and geography with kind of a focus on urban land use planning, of all things. I never wanted to be an architect. And then I met Jerry and worked for an architect for, 20 plus years of my career. So I can kind of make that parallel a little bit, but no, I went from Georgia to Santa Barbara, which was a big, fairly decent sized culture shock, even having spent a lot of time in Northern California. And my freshman year, my mother liked to say that, my grades my academic grades weren't good, but my suntanning grade was, 4.0.
Straight A's on the suntan. That's awesome. One of the things I want to ask you about is, okay, you say you go and work with the bid in Atlanta, and you're stapling documents and doing things. And one of the things that I found quite interesting is, and it's confirmed by your background, because you've done a lot of different things, which means you have to try a lot of different things for the first time. And I'm curious, back in those early days, can you recall a time where you were given an assignment to do something and you thought, this is not in my wheelhouse at all, but hey, what the heck? I'll give it a shot.
When I got hired full-time as an employee after I graduated uni and moved back to Atlanta in '93, that was a lot of things I had never done before. But, it's all smoke and mirrors, right? Isn't that what we say? I like to try new things. I like to learn new things. So I think that's always served me well. I probably in my 20s, aspired, and 30s aspired, to do great things and be recognized and all of that. And so I think that drive also meant that, you've got to learn, right? You need to be able to figure out what the pieces are and then how they fit together. It's one of the things I've seen in the corporate world. And I think, we can agree we see in the event world to some extent is a little bit of like myopic thinking and planning. You know, if you're food and beverage, you can tend to only think about how food and beverage, you know, is impacted and impacts, you know, what do you need from a space standpoint, your staffing, but how does food and beverage planning and build and everything impact logistics or impact, you know, the actual build? How much power do you need? So it's taking all of the, I mean, Jerry called it in Salt Lake, we introduced the DIP, the design integration process, which I credit him for, where I really learned how to take the pieces and have them fit together. And I mean, a big part of what I do now too is working with the various departments on if I make this decision, who does it impact? How does it impact them? And while it's good for me now, is it causing somebody more work down the food chain or the pipeline? And that's a tough one, because most people tend to make decisions quickly because it benefits their work, and it looks like it's a benefit for their work, but it could be a detriment to somebody else.
You've mentioned Jerry a lot. A very important figure in the major event space, and also for you personally, a really important mentor. I'm curious, you know, what were your experiences like with Jerry, and what was it like to be mentored by someone like him?
I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for that mentorship. I mean, he had a huge heart. He had such a great attitude about things. You know, the kind of the further up the food chain and the more pressure, you know, every once in a while you would see it, but for the most part, he really enjoyed mentoring other people, and, you know, and he saw the big picture. And that is so important in any event, right? Is for, again, people to understand what roles and responsibilities are. There is something to be said, you know, about people staying in their lane, but in the same time, you know, collectively working together, being a team, were all things I learned from working with and for him over the years. And I was fortunate. I mean, there was a number of us, you know, Todd Barnes, Trisha Benton, you know, we all had the fortune of, you know, Jeff Keys, of working with him for years and having that opportunity to be mentored. He really saw the whole thing, you know. I mean, he saw like what the ecosystem should look like, and he was really good about articulating how all the pieces should come together. And so, yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for all those years with him and the entire team that, you know, he brought together time after time.
When you talk about bringing pieces together, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. There are a lot of moving parts when it comes to these events. And as you mentioned, you know, people kind of zoom in on their area of expertise, and as they rightly should. I mean, we all need to focus on our areas of expertise. But to me, one of the exhilarating things about these major events is they are all unique and they are all challenging to pull off. You know, it's not an easy thing to do. And so I'm curious, if you look back on your career, are there some events, I'm not asking you to be judgmental here or calling people out inappropriately, but were there certain events where you face some really significant challenges, whatever they might be, and how did you overcome them? I wonder if you can share a couple of stories of some of the challenges that you faced and how you addressed them.
Well, you know, I will. I've got, you know, two. Again, I don't want to. None of this is me personally, right? We're a team. You know, especially on these big events, no one's doing anything on their own, despite what despite what some people may tell you. But you know, for us in Salt Lake City, when 9/11 happened, you know, and the pivot that we had to do to reshape securing the venues and rethinking all of our policies and procedures around that. And, you know, at the same time, you know, as I said, I would take my vacation from SLOC to do Super Bowl. I mean, Super Bowl was happening before the games in 2002. So, and it was in New Orleans, which was not the easiest venue. I didn't have a lot to do with it because I was very focused on Salt Lake, but, you know, Jerry having to balance. At the same time, it was kind of the same thing, right? It's what policies and procedures were happening with the NFL at Super Bowl were very much in line with what we were doing in Salt Lake. So to have, you know, that expertise and to be able to bring people together and to have to change, to your point, you know, people are very focused on their jobs, and this changed people's jobs. And you know, again, policies and procedures and how we did business from, you know, what we had done, whether it was 96 or the Super Bowl in 2001, which was in Tampa. So that was a good one. And then I just had the opportunity to work the Formula One race in Las Vegas in November, which was a really interesting project to work on. I wasn't involved in a lot of the planning per se. I did a couple site visits, but you know, there were a number of people that, you know, are part of our crew that have done sort of like the big sports event side of things, you know, whether it was Super Bowl or Olympics. A lot of the staff from F1 came from the festival environment, which is a little bit different in how they plan and kind of the way they operate. And I think there's good and bad to all of it. I mean, obviously I'm kind of, I don't want to say I'm set in my ways because I try to be flexible and learn, but certainly with what we've done, I think we have a lot of process and, you know, we put schedules together and we try to stick to the schedules, and you have, you know, daily communication meetings so that you're not tripping over each other. And F1 was a challenge in that there was multiple venues that were the similar things were happening in each venue, but it was spread out, you know, around the track. But, you know, and we had people like Steven Randall, who was with us in Salt Lake, who's an amazing, you know, site designer. And he was the site designer and site manager at the Sphere, which was a really cool venue. But like, we didn't have daily communication meetings and schedule meetings. And so, you know, you got on site and it was sort of like you had to try to gather a lot of that information and then stay on top of it. When you're not meeting every day, and you've got 7 kind of different zones where you're trying to do work, it's not necessarily easy to be able to, you know, find out, oh, your bleachers or your suites are behind in the construction. So, and I was working for the decor company, which I'll talk about Blue Media in a few minutes because they're phenomenal. I'm loving working with them. They brought me out of retirement because I'd kind of quit the whole event industry, which is like the mafia. You never really get a chance to leave, do you?
No, I've tried personally a couple of times. It's very hard to escape the orbit of major events. You know, they have this gravitational pull that just kind of sucks you back in. I want to ask about Formula One because it's not uncommon for big events to have negative press in the lead up, right? So we saw this in Tokyo with the games after COVID. There was so much negative media being churned out. And I don't want to say that it was malicious. I think people were rightly concerned, but sometimes that happens. And I'm curious, you know, in your experience, if that had any kind of impact on the team, you know, with Formula One, because it was really getting railed on by the press, and, you know, rightly or wrongly. You know, I'm not trying to make a judgment there, but I'm really more interested in the reaction of people on the ground who are doing this, you know, that are involved in something that is so high profile, and it's an important event. You know, it's an important event for Formula One here in the U.S., you know, having this kind of presence here. And so I'm just curious the kind of your take, your experience on working on an event where, you know, the press was pretty antagonistic toward it.
Well, you know, kind of like my quote, right? Wanted encouragers, because there's plenty of critics. I think, and that's kind of become the role of the press, is to criticize pretty much everything. I mean, you know, I don't know about you. I subscribe to a daily news feed called Nice News because I'd like to know the good things going on in the world. I mean, I'm not trying to be Mary Poppins per se, but again, there's just so much negativity everywhere. You know, I wouldn't say it necessarily impacted all of the crew that worked. I mean, it gets a little discouraging, but, you know, you're all in the trenches together. And quite honestly, you're so busy doing the work, it's pretty easy to kind of tune out the media. Now, I will tell you, I am a CNBC junkie. I'm a stock market junkie. I mean, that's yet another thing that, you know, wasn't on there. But and CNBC did a number of really great news stories from Formula One, you know, really showcasing the socioeconomic impact, but and then the global, you know, the global phenomena that is F1 that just has never been, you know, as popular in the US as certainly Europe or the Middle East or Asia. So it was interesting in that respect. But I have a friend who is an executive at Bellagio, so MGM Resorts, and he and I had a conversation when I had first gotten on site. And this is not me necessarily being critical, but the comment from him was that the Las Vegas Grand Prix group didn't do the best job communicating out. Changes and impacts and sharing. The sharing of information was what I heard was the most criticism, and I can't judge that because I wasn't really involved with the planning so much. But, the hotels on the Strip did their own thing. It was their ticket packages and their bleachers. And part of that was, I think, a little bit in rebellion to the fact that LVGP wasn't terribly forthcoming. And I think part of it is it's a new event. And I think they didn't know what they didn't know. And then you get into budgets, and that tends to impact everything too. But I know when LVGP went to the hotels to ask for things, the closer we got to the race, those hotels were all pretty much, you didn't talk to us. Why are we going to help you? And that's unfortunate. I mean, I certainly, I think from the number of events we've done, we can understand that. I do think that I haven't done I did an after action report for Blue Media. I haven't done anything with the person that we reported to at LVGP. But, I'm hoping that that's a lesson that they learned in terms of, that, because they've got at least 2 more years under the initial contract with an option for 7 more years if the city and everybody wants it back. I think we're starting to see such positive economic numbers that, it's probably a better chance now than when the race started of it continuing for what they had talked about was a 10-year contract. But, it's what we learn. That's one of the things that's nice about, recurring events, right? Is you learn from year to year and you make it better for the local community who tends to get, excluded. It's harder. Right? And the good news is we get a redo in Utah, not that we didn't do a great job the first time around. And we certainly, thanks to the leadership team there, really included the community, which doesn't always happen in these big cities, or these big events. But yeah, so, it was a challenge. And then of course, it was interesting because it was a level 2 security event too, right? So at a level 1, like at Super Bowl, we're temporary ceiling, manhole covers and all of that. And, where the metal water main cover came off that damaged that Ferrari car on the first night of training on Thursday, it was a level 2 event. I don't know if anybody had thought, because Formula One itself was responsible for the track and the development. And I don't know if they've ever really thought about that. Oh, wait, we've got manhole covers and, metal water covers that need to be temporarily sealed so the cars can go however many hundreds of miles an hour on it.
Well, you make some really great points there. Number one, this being the first iteration of the event, it's always difficult. Number two, I think when it comes to media coverage of some of these big events, and thinking about Olympic Games, there's often negative coverage in the lead up. But then when the event starts happening, the focus really turns to the competitors and the competitions. And then the stories become much more inspirational and much more positive, because you're really focused on that, absent some horrific scandal or something. But typically you see much more positive coverage. We certainly saw that, I think, from Tokyo. And I think it's helpful going through that to be able to tell organizers, hey, if you see this kind of negative coverage, it's totally normal. It's just kind of part of the lifespan of a high profile event, especially one that's not normally held in the country on a regular basis. Like you mentioned, the Super Bowl, you don't have those kinds of stories about the Super Bowl because the Super Bowl has been held 50, 60 times or however many times it's been held. And everybody kind of knows what to expect. And so you don't have that kind of negative coverage in the lead up to it. People are really more focused on the teams that are going to be participating and so on and so forth. And so not so much the operation of it. So I just find that whole thing fascinating. Now, I do want to ask you about escaping the orbit of major events, because you have gone on and you've done other things. And so my question about that is, what precipitated that decision? Because you were doing all these things, like you said, with Jerry Anderson and others, but you also wanted to do some other things. So what kind of led you down some alternative pathways to find some other things to do aside from working in these events?
Well, so my first foray out of, I guess, events, but it got me more sort of absolutely got me more on the business, in the business world, was in 2011. I was offered the opportunity to become executive director of a nonprofit here in San Diego, but that was focused on working with startups and early stage companies, also some mature companies, but in helping them create their business plans and go after funding. And but it was because of the my boss, who was we were like a division of a larger nonprofit that's here, that's still really active. I knew his brother from the sports industry, and they were looking for somebody, and I was kind of at a crossroads, not 100. I mean, I was still working for Jerry. We're heading into the Super Bowl in Indianapolis, but they came to me and said, "Look, you've got this really interesting experience. What do you think?" It's still sports related. You're still in the sports and active lifestyle space, but this is what we're doing. And, to your point about we were talking about, I like to learn. It was like, oh, I don't know anything about mergers and acquisitions or startup funding, bootstrapping or any of that. So it just sounded interesting. And I had a staff of 2. So there was really 3 of us that were putting all this together, and it was really fun. And I learned a lot. And, and when you're become, the head of an organization, even as small as 3, but I mean, I had over 100 volunteer mentors, who could do everything from retail and, merchandising to budgets and marketing and all of those things. And so how to put together a business plan, not that dissimilar, honestly, from the event industry, where you've got, your however, I don't even know what the number of functional areas the IOC is now calling out. At one point, it was only like 32. I think it's closer to 40 now. But, you take all a business plan is all of those, very similar functional areas, and how to take those functions, and you have to plan for them from a budget standpoint, your staffing, and what does each of those, what are the requirements, and the, what do they do? What's the operations, and how does a company become a company and grow? And so I was really fortunate to have had a great mentor through all of that as well. He sadly also passed away, which is part of why I ended up leaving the organization in 2014, because it went in a direction that I was not a good fit any longer. But I was fortunate to have that experience, and went back into the event side of things, mostly consulting for Jerry, picked up a few things here and there around here. And then, and then in took some time off in 2017, 18, still did a little consulting. And then 2019 ended up, got approached by, as I said, a party rentals company in Roseville, California, that wanted to get into big events. They have a lot of really beautiful structures, tents, but they're hard wall and glass wall. And they wanted to get into the big event world. And, at the time, LA had been awarded and World Cup was coming. So we're kind of at that point again in this country. And now with Salt Lake getting the games in 2034, we've got, 10 years of major events coming to this country, where we have an opportunity, those of us that have been around for a while, to again kind of mentor the next generation coming up and provide, jobs, for World Cup in 7 US cities, 2 cities in Canada and 2 in Mexico, I think. If I have it right, it could be wrong because I'm not that engaged in it all. And then you've got the games in LA and then the games in Utah. So it's in another exciting time, which it was in the 90s. And so this company is now actually working Super Bowl. It's a great company, but I didn't want to relocate to Northern California from San Diego. So that was my deal breaker there. So walked away from that at the end of that year, and then COVID hit. So, and then now what I'm doing now, which I guess is the time to talk about it. So I, during COVID, was approached by a woman that I knew she'd worked for Sportsmark in Vancouver, and she had moved to San Diego and is the director of marketing and communication for Feeding San Diego, which is the San Diego chapter of Feeding America. So we provide food to the community, and they were looking to launch an event to distribute food to all people, specifically focused on hospitality industry. So in early 21, so now we're 10 months into the pandemic, the city of San Diego, we're a huge hospitality town. We do conventions conventions and golf events and all of that. So they had identified 250,000 out of work hospitality workers, of which The city uh, identified probably 70,000 were likely food insecure and had no idea what the resources were to help them. And I mean, you and I know when you're an event person, you usually find gigs. And so, I mean, think about it, 250,000 people out of work in our little town, and what do you do? So the organization wanted to, typically Feeding San Diego is like a business to business. So we get food in and then we distribute it to like Salvation Army, or we have a organization here that does great work, San Diego Rescue Mission. But this became a B2C, business to consumer. So this was a direct distribution to the community. And again, it was very focused on the hospitality industry. So we had like, a sign up for it. And we produced this in a parking lot because again, it's the middle of COVID. So, we're wearing masks and doing all this. And this is a great company. They didn't really have a lot of event people. And Dana knew I was an event person. So she called and said, hey, would you be interested in this? I said, sure, that sounds really interesting. I was consulting on another event that was based here in San Diego at the time, and I was fortunate that they kept me on board through the pandemic. We canceled the event for 2020 and did it in 21. But yeah, so she reached out, and it turned out that the CEO, who I didn't realize was the CEO at the time, was somebody that, again, I had met when I first moved here and was working for the Sports Council. And so he had been very active on the Super Bowl host committee for 1998 and 2003, which was hosted here in San Diego at the old Jack Murphy Stadium and Qualcomm Stadium. But yeah, so he brought me on board, and now, so I helped launch this event, which we just sunset because we're now back at a place where it's not quite as necessary to do a direct distribution, so we can focus sending our food to our agencies, and those agencies distribute the food to the public. But I also somehow picked up doing all of the data and analytics, which we talked about, new skills, had not a lot of experience doing that. I mean, it's one thing to sit down after Super Bowl and work with Todd Barnes and the team and say, how many miles of fence did we put in and how many square feet of tenting? I mean, that's one set of metrics, but this is, I had to learn we have an ERP system. I had to learn the ERP system. I now am the manager of our ERP system. I'm the person that they come to when the staff comes to when they get error messages, which seems to happen fairly regularly, and, problem solve all that. And we've got a number of plugins that also have to be able to work so that we can, get our agencies that can place orders and distribute that food out. And our routing system is actually, ironically, one of Qualcomm's first ever platforms, Omnitrax, that we're using for our routing system. So yeah, so it's been a great opportunity to learn a lot of new skills. And then again, taking that ERP system and pulling the data and analytics out, reporting back up to Feeding America, reporting to the community here. And then the other thing, as I kind of mentioned before, working in silos. This organization, when I came on board, was, and some of it may be because of COVID and people working from home, so you're not seeing each other as much. But this organization, we're still working on, if I make this decision, how does that impact, down, within the ecosystem. It's my mantra. I think I tend to walk around with the bullhorn in my hand saying, don't make a decision without thinking about it. So,
well, I want to come back to one of the recurring themes in our conversation, which is you taking on new challenges. And I want to know where that comes from, because all right, 2011, there's this nonprofit saying, hey, you want to be the executive director, learning about how to do things with startups and mergers and acquisitions. And these are things that you didn't know about. A person in that position could very easily say, well, that's really not in my wheelhouse. It's not what I do. What is it about you that makes you want to say yes to these things? And I will do it, and I will learn this new thing, because I don't think that's super common among people, but I think it's also critical in events. At least the people that I know, that I've worked with, the people that seem to do well in this kind of industry are people who are not afraid to say yes to challenges. And I am curious for you where it comes from.
I maybe it's genetics. I don't know. I like to learn. And I mean, I was really fortunate when I went to the nonprofit in 2011 that, as I said, I had a boss and mentor who was someone that I knew of. I had a tremendous amount of respect for. I mean, he was an absolute rainmaker here in San Diego, in the community, and to have the opportunity to learn from him was not something. I mean, I love my community. I don't always agree with a lot of things that are going on in it, but I love my community. And again, what this gentleman's name was, Dwayne Roth. He sadly passed away, and again, I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from him. And, when I trust me, I set the bar pretty low on, I'm like, I don't know. M&A is mergers and what, it was when I interviewed, but and I'm sure some of it, as I said, his brother is the one that introduced me to him and said, this I think would be good for you. So I owe Ted a lot too, but to have that kind of confidence placed in me just based on, interactions over the years. And I think I was just fortunate. And then, again, the same thing kind of with Feeding San Diego and what I've been doing here. The CEO at the time, again, is someone that I knew, who I adore. I mean, he's not our CEO anymore, but is somebody I still see. I have a tremendous amount of respect for as a businessman in his own right. And then also as the leader of this organization, because he came out of retirement to take over here when we had some changes during the pandemic. And so, and he knew I didn't know anything about data and analytics or certainly the ERP system, but he just said, we'll figure it out, and I'm not afraid to say, I don't know. And to go to somebody smarter than I am, of which there's plenty, to say, help me. How do I figure this out? I don't sit still well, and I'm not good if I'm bored. So this has been a really great challenge. I mean, I wouldn't say anything really in my career has had me be terribly bored, but.
Okay. So another theme that has run through our conversation today is paying it forward. That's important to you. And it's one of the reasons that I'm doing these podcasts is I think the stories that people who've been in this business a long time, I think the stories are important. They matter. But I also think it's important for them to share knowledge and experiences that could help people who might be considering getting into this kind of industry, And so in that pay it forward headspace, if you are approached by someone who is thinking, oh, I'd love to work for the Olympic Games. That sounds so cool. I'd love to work for the Super Bowl. That sounds amazing. What advice would you give them?
Don't be afraid of hard work, because it's, it's, you have to pay your dues, especially it's still in the event industry. It's interesting. It's never thought I'd turn into my mom saying, oh God, these kids. But, I find myself sometimes doing that with the people that are kind of coming up behind us, that they were raised differently from, I think, how we were raised, and I don't know if this is necessarily, I don't know that it's a negative per se. It's just different, right? Everybody got a trophy, whereas we had to work hard and pay dues, and there wasn't, equality along those lines. This generation coming up though, but I do think that this generation coming up probably has a little bit more, I don't know if I want to say empathy per se, because it's something I think that I really want to work on with people, or maybe it's sympathy, but again, taking other people into consideration. Again, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I wanted to climb that ladder and be recognized and do all of that. And certainly now that I'm in my almost mid 50s, it's less important to me, because you look back on your career and it's like, God, I've been so fortunate in the people that I've worked for and with, people that I've met, the friends that I've maintained through all of these years, because as this event group, we've gotten to go all over the world together and experience some of the same things within organizing committees, but in different locations, which is amazing. I mean, it's special. So paying it forward, I feel like I kind of owe it to the people that came before me and that took the time for me to do it for other people, and to ensure that the event industry is successful going forward. I mean, to your point about the media and, the negativity in the media, money is so critical in all this, and how expensive, running any event is these days, and the gouging that may go on in the local city and, the host city or whatever it is. It's kind of trying to get past all of that and making sure that we create positive experiences for everyone that's involved, whether it's staff or athletes or concert goers or guests or, whomever it is, vendors.
Well, one of the things that when it comes to the paying forward, a lesson that's come through to me that you have really exemplified is really about relationships. At the end of the day, it's about people. And so I'm curious your take on the importance of fostering meaningful relationships with people in this space. As if I were a young person looking at potentially embarking on a career in this event industry, I think one piece of advice I would probably share with that younger person is it's a small industry. Everybody knows everybody or is connected. The 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon kind of thing, right? And so fostering meaningful relationships, I think, in this industry is absolutely vital. What's your take on that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I don't want this to sound completely obnoxious, but it's really not what we know. It's who we know in this business. And to your point, in the event industry specifically, every event has an ending. Like that's one of the things I think that always attracted me to it too. We didn't have again, not having necessarily worked a lot of corporate jobs and been, in the same thing day in and day out, with the event industry, there's a finite end, right? So there's scramble and all of that, but you're doing it as a team. And trust me, I'm the first to admit in my 20s and 30s, I didn't always have the best attitude. And, it's easy to sort of get lost in the weeds. And, you're not going to get along with everybody, unfortunately. But nowadays it's, again, paying your dues, having a good attitude and, really, and knowing it's okay to not know what you want. But, when kids come to me and ask me questions like that, because I tend to get it a lot, first thing I always ask them is, where do you want to live? Right. And do you have an idea of what you want to do? Right. Like, if you want to work for a professional team, chances are you got to start in ticketing because most professional teams start their people in ticketing and then maybe you'll move around and get something else. Do you want to do marketing? It's helping them to kind of dial it down. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to do that. But, think about there's so many great options, again, within the event industry. And you don't necessarily need an education to do it either. When I think now, you may need specific skills like an electrician. But I don't know that being an electrician, working for an Agreco or a CAT or whomever, your temporary power company is going to be, doesn't mean you need necessarily a 4-year degree or an electrical engineering degree. But, to trade school could be important and, that may be a better option for some people. So I think that it's such a broad industry. There's so much opportunity within it. And I think that's also kind of what excites me about working with people that are coming up is, helping them sort of think about what all the opportunities are. Sometimes it can be overwhelming because they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize there's that much that's out there. But it gives them something more to think about and to potentially try. Like you said, I've done just about everything.
Well, okay. You said, hey, you might have an opportunity to work in many different, really interesting locations, cities and whatnot. So as you look back at your career, I'm just asking because I'm curious, as you look back at your career, favorite place to work? You've been all over the place doing work in these events domestically and internationally. What was your favorite one?
It's hard to have it's almost like choosing a favorite child, right? Because every one of them has had something incredibly special. And what's made it special are the people. I mean, let's be honest, it was, Salt Lake by far, it will always be one of the top, 3 events I've ever worked, but it's because of the team that got brought together and the leadership. Again, I was there for 5 years, but those last couple years under Minton Fraser's guidance, I thought really, I mean, you were there, you knew what it was like. I mean, there were some years that were really hard and that were really negative, and they came in with a great attitude and they brought so much, I guess, structure and almost hope that I think it helped people that maybe weren't in the best frame of mind at that point in time. There are certain cities that, I mean, having done the Super Bowl in Indianapolis, which I think a lot of people are like, oh my God, Indianapolis. the people in Indianapolis are some of the most generous and lovely people you will ever meet, and that was, I feel fortunate to have been there. I mean, every place I've been has a lot of positive. And again, it comes back to the people that are with you when you do it. I mean, there's very few events I've worked where Trish Fenton hasn't been there. She's one of my dearest friends. And so I consider myself fortunate that, we've had the opportunity. Or, when we went to Vancouver, being an American in Vancouver wasn't the easiest thing, because there were a lot of Americans that kind of went up there in the early days and patted them on the head and said, just let us come along, little brother, little sister, and move on over and we'll take care of it all. And, that was pretty insulting. But it was a great city and great people once you kind of got through, some of what had, I think, impacted them in the early days. And, and we had, great times going to the interior, going up to Kelowna, or, going up to the wine country or out to the island. And so it's those experiences, that really make it special. Honestly, I'm not sure I could tell you that I've seen a lot of the sports actual events. But I certainly remember the experiences around it and the people I was with.
Okay, I have to ask a question about seeing sport events, because I'm like you. You work behind the scenes, and then the events are going on, and you're not actually able oftentimes to view them. But there are events on occasion where I've gone as a spectator, but I will admit that sometimes I have a hard time removing my event glasses. Because I'm looking at how they're queuing people and how they've set up the barricades, and just looking at the operation, and so on and so forth. And sometimes it takes away a little bit from it, or I'm not focusing on the competition as much sometimes as I am looking at the security person there on the field of play who doesn't have his back to the show. It's like. Do you ever find yourself in that situation where you go to an event or you're at a venue and you're just having a hard time looking away from the operation?
Absolutely, 100% of the time. I am the worst spectator ever because I do that. I went to was it 2017? I was fortunate enough to go to Game 5 of the NBA Finals in Oakland. And we flew up, and as we were walking in, I'm like, look, and they didn't expect to have the fifth game, right? They, everybody was, the Warriors are going to sweep it. So of course I'm looking around, and the person I was with looked at me at one point and said, done. You're done. You're not working. This is not your event. We're here to be spectators. Just shut up already. Like, I don't want to hear any more about this queue line is so long and they're going to trip down that. So the trash needs to be taken out from here. Yeah, I am a terrible spectator.
Yeah, I'm okay. But I have to make a conscious effort to rein it in. Otherwise, I get caught up in things that I really shouldn't be worrying about.
Well, it was I mentioned going to the Foo Fighter concert in Lake Tahoe at the I think it's Harvey's little outdoor concert venue. And, as we're walking in, I'm looking at the queue line for drinks. And then we were in seats, and I'm sitting in my seats, and there was a medical incident that happened like on the aisleway just below. And I took everything in my power and like not to go down there or try to find somebody to help. I mean, there was people around helping, but you just see that and you kind of go into event mode, and it's, it's hard.
But don't you think that's a quality that actually draws people to events? I'm wondering, even if you hadn't pursued a career in events, you would probably still want to be the person that you have this natural inclination to help somebody and to serve if there's a situation you would want to jump in anyway. I kind of feel that's how you would handle it, even if you were an event professional or not, just because that's the way you are.
I would hope so, but I think events has definitely helped my confidence in my ability to be able to truly help. Not walk by somebody that looks like, we did a 5K over the weekend, me and the dog, and there was somebody that had sat down, and and I wasn't very concerned about my time, so I stopped and went over to make sure that they were okay. There was nobody else checking on them, and I would hope that I would do that anyway, but certainly having that sort of event background and knowing that we're trained for those things, regardless of what our position is, that usually ends up being part of what we learn is how to respond, because you never know what you're going to run into when you're on a venue.
Well, as we wrap it up here, because I just looked at the clock, I'm like, holy cow, we've already been talking for an hour. Uh, one thing that we were talking about, as I was talking about your bio before we got on air, is you were talking about some of these event courses that you had developed with someone, and I'm curious to learn more about that. So, can you share with me and also our viewers and listeners a little bit more about some of the, and this is another way that you're paying it forward, right? You're creating content that helps people who are early in their career or aspiring event professionals.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, so this amazing woman, Sharon Outram, who actually used to work at the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. So she did the 96 games and then went on to do a lot of the hospitality and party planning for Super Bowl and World Cup and all of that. She left the industry, I want to say like 2017, 2018, and she started a company called Field Experience. It's Field within an X and Experience. And she's just amazing. I mean, she really is very much about paying it forward. And she had kind of pitched Jerry on this in the early days. And then and I think the world of her. She's a dear friend. And we started talking about it. She was looking for a little bit of help. And again, I had done this work in the startup space, right? I mean, don't know anything about it's a software as a service. I didn't know a lot about SaaS and how to necessarily, I certainly don't know how to build a website or do anything like that or an app. But, just kind of sat down with her and we started talking about really the need. But for her and her specific aspect of events, right, and hospitality, it's all about customer service, right? And that can be taught and it needs to be taught because I think that is something that is not inherent in everybody. And certainly the more reliant we become on our devices, what we had seen, especially like when we did the Super Bowl in New Jersey, I had a group of volunteers that were helping to direct fans to and from the train station. And, I'd see them on camera. I'd walk around and, their heads were down and they're on their phone. It's like, no. You need to be engaging. So Sharon really had that vision and wanted to bring that to life. And it really has exploded in that. I mean, there's a course on things like radical candor and, teaching empathy, which again, you can do. And I think, the world really changed a lot, in 2020 and 2021 between the pandemic and, where we've gone around equal rights and, civil rights and how we treat our neighbors. And I think that, Sharon's coursework and stuff has been very timely in that manner. So it did start out where we were working with a professor to help put the curriculum together, but it really has been, event management 101. There's marketing. We've gotten marketing experts in to do marketing courses. We've had, professional athletes, talk about their journey and their career. And, you're seeing more and more professional athletes that are investing in, small companies, and they see things that maybe we don't see in terms of need in different industries. And so it's been a lot of fun. I mean, we're still kind of in the early stages. I mean, we're launched and all of that. We were approached last year to create an esports course. Because I had the fortune right before the pandemic, I was approached to help launch the Call of Duty League with the Minnesota Rocker and Activision Blizzard. And, I didn't know, I'm still not a gamer, but it was, and again, an event is an event, right? It still was, we were still planning all of the same functions. It was just a little bit different venue, and, your athlete warm-up areas were differently designed and all of that. So, it really is geared towards, again, helping people that are interested in getting into the industry, learn some of the skills, hopefully ahead of time. And then, and it's not all that we're doing because we've also got a pipeline for talent, right? So we take this talent and we've got, badges and certificates and all of that. And we've partnered with, we've had some great working with B of A and Visa, where they've come to us and said, hey, we're looking for good people to come and work. When Visa takes their groups to the Olympics, to know that you've got kids that have been trained in good customer service. To me and Sharon, that's really key. That's critical. And that's a great opportunity. They've been vetted. So it's baby steps, and we've certainly had some technological challenges, but it's been really fun and interesting. And we've met a lot of really great people that are starting to, come up. We've been working with the NCAA on Final Four, men's and women's, for since before the pandemic. in terms of being a pipeline for them. You know, kids take the classes, and then that's part of it too, is sort of creating those opportunities where you do the coursework, you do well because there's, you know, quizzes and tests as you go along, and you get the opportunity to be asked to participate in one of these events.
So if people want to learn more about field experience and they want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach out and contact you?
Well, you could do it via LinkedIn or my email address, which is lisalfriedman@gmail.com.
All right, fantastic. Before we let you go, last opportunity, any other experiences, stories, insights you want to share?
Too many to count. I mean, it's someday I think we all need to sit down and put our stories together and create a book of just, you know, people that we've met, people that we have met that we didn't want to meet, you know, people that there's just too many. But I'm fortunate. I've had a great career. I've had great mentors. I've made great, phenomenal friends that are still friends today. I mean, I think we've been fortunate to live in a really special time in the event world, and we still get to be a part of it, which, you know, excited about 2034 coming back to Utah, and hope to be there in some capacity, maybe just as a spectator, but.
Oh, me too. And you just gave me an idea, you know, maybe we should create an event genealogical tree, right? Like where you just had this tree of people, you know, from Jerry Anderson on down, and you could just kind of see where everybody's roots were planted. And I don't know. I don't think about that. What's that?
The original, the OGs, well, who I consider the OGs, and I'm sure that there are people from other countries that, well, because you also have to kind of do it from a country standpoint, right?
Yeah.
But in my mind, the OGs are Stuart Ash and Dave Gustafson and Larry. Why am I blanking on Larry's last name? Because I'm getting old. And Harvey Louie. I mean, they all kind of started out as Disney. I think it was Dave was the first one, but they started out as like Disney World or Disneyland parade people, and then that led them to the LA Olympics. I mean, Craig Williams. Forgot about Craig. Craig was part of that group, but that group, if you haven't talked to them, let me set all of that up, because they kind of were probably the nexus of all of it.
Yeah. All right. My wheels are spinning. I'm getting off topic here. So we'll wrap this up for now, but we're going to keep having a conversation. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Listeners, viewers, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to participate in our conversation. Please like and subscribe to our podcast, and we'll catch you again soon. Lisa, again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a privilege. Thank you for letting me share.